Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Boy, I appreciate you being with me. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. I got to go to automotive swap meet. This is my time of the year uh, because let me see. There was a swap meet last week. There's this last Saturday. There's a swap meet coming up this next Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then after that, there's another swap meet. I love it. And, I love finding bargains. Most of you who watch my channel know that I'm a gearhead. I love cars, and you can see some of my little die cast cars, and I love the big cars. Okay. And I've got a 69 Mach 1 428 Cobra Jet car that I've had for 20 years. It's absolutely stunningly gorgeous. That's a depiction of it right there. Same color, Tahoe turquoise. Just, it's a beast, absolute beast. But anyway, I went to a swap meet in Norman, Oklahoma, and I found the coolest item. I just got to tell you about this. This is really cool. It's called a cross ram, and they were made. This one was made in the real early '60s, and it has matching Chevrolet factory 550 CFM carbs setting on top with the linkage. I mean, you just don't find that kind of stuff. The rat rodders love them. The hot street rodders love them. And anyway, I got it at a bargain. It's uh, it's just one of those things. When I bought it, paid for it, carried it back to the truck, and my wife was asking me, "Well, what's it worth?" And I said, "Well, let's put it like this: just the intake, without the carbs and linkage, just the intake is worth maybe not quite double, but certainly almost double what I paid for the whole setup." So yeah, I love swap meets. Okay, well, excuse me here. We are looking at continuing our study of Shemeni Atzerat, the last of Israel's feast days, yearly feast days, and I'm not going to debate all of that. It was the eighth day, and it signified, according to every single Jewish source and every single historical source that I have been able to find, signified the new creation, a new beginning. Because after all, Sukkot was the feast of the turning of the year. It closed out the year. Shemini Atzerat signified the new beginning. And so with that in mind, what I've been sharing with you is how the concept of the new creation. Now, does the term Shemini Atzerat appear in, for instance, Psalms 102 that we've spent 4 or 5 weeks looking at? No, it doesn't. The concept is there because you have God going to destroy the old heaven and earth. And he was going to create a new people with a new name at the time of the coming of the Lord in glory. Just go back and watch those videos. Well, then we come to what is widely considered the most foundational, the most clear cut, and in some respects, some would argue, the most important of all of the Old Testament prophecies of the new creation. And I have extensive discussions of this, of Isaiah 65 and Isaiah 66, in my book, The Elements Shall Melt with Fervent Heat. By the way, that's a discussion of the passing of the old creation and the creation of the new creation. Just as Peter said, according to his promise, we look for a new heaven and a new earth. Virtually, like 99.9% of the commentators agree. Peter's drawing on Isaiah 65, Isaiah 66. So with that in mind, we need to take a look. Now, if you've been watching, pardon me, if you've been watching my Now TV videos on every Friday, then what I'm about to present will be somewhat repetitious, but it's really, Really important. Okay? So don't just dismiss it. Pay attention. Get it firmly seated. Because folks, when you get some of this stuff, when you get the point of what Isaiah is saying, then all futurist eschatologies just go out the window. And here's what I mean. Isaiah 64 through 66 is a united prophecy of the coming of the Lord to create new heaven and new earth. Now, I'm not going to go in as extensive detail this morning as I did in my Now TV. So go back and watch the Now TV videos, okay? And by the way, we're approaching really, really closely 12,000 subscribers. We're 250 away. So let's get busy. Let's get it done. So anyway, here is part of what I presented on the Now TV. But again, for the in-depth discussion, go to the Now TV videos. Isaiah 64 to 66 is a prophecy, a united prophecy. There's no break. A united prophecy of the coming of the Lord to bring in the new heaven and new earth. But according to Isaiah chapter 64, that coming of the Lord to bring in the new creation would be a day of the Lord just like previous days of the Lord. Follow this closely. Pardon me. Isaiah is depicted on praying to the Lord on the behalf of Israel. Oh, that you would rend the heavens, that you would come down, that the mountains might flow down at your presence. As when the melting fire burns, the fire causes the waters to boil, to make your name known to your adversaries, that the nations may tremble at your presence. Boy, sound like the end of time, doesn't it? And a lot of commentators interpret it that way. Lord, we want you to come, destroy heaven and earth. But wait a minute. When you did, that's in the past tense, when you did terrible things for which we did not look, you came down. The mountains flowed, which means the mountains were melted. And look at Micah chapter 1 for a description of this at the time of the destruction of the 10 northern tribes at the hands of the Assyrians. It's clear. Micah chapter 1, you came down, the mountains melted at your presence. Isaiah chapter 64, Lord, we want you to come. We want you to rend the heavens. We want the mountains to melt at your presence, because in the past, when you did marvelous things for which we did not look, you came down and the mountains melted. Now, folks, the mountains never literally melted. Yahweh never literally, visibly, bodily came out of heaven and melted the earth in flaming fire. But Micah says he did. So what we're saying here is that while the literal words of melting mountains, while the literal words of coming down are present, the literalistic interpretation of those literal words is not found there. Just the opposite. We cannot put a literalistic interpretation on those literal words. This is the marvel of apocalyptic language. And it is something that especially the dispensational world seems not to understand. Because in one dispensational book after another, they tell us, well, the Bible has to be taken literally. Grant Jeffries passed away a few years ago. Grant Jeffries said there's not a single Old Testament prophecy that was ever fulfilled spiritually. They were all fulfilled, the ones that were fulfilled, literally. I was literally stunned when I read his comments because, Isaiah chapter 40 predicted the coming of the one who is the voice of one crying in the wilderness, saying, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Let every valley be filled and every mountain be lowered. Oh, wait. John the Baptizer was the voice, according to Mark chapter 1, 1-3. No question about it. But John the Baptizer never leveled, literally, physically, any mountain, never filled up any valley. So Mr. Jeffries is just simply flat out wrong. Okay, so we have the coming of the Lord to bring in the new heaven and new earth. But the coming of the Lord to bring in the new heaven and the new earth would be a coming of the Lord as past comings of the Lord, which were never literal, physical, bodily, or visible. Therefore, the coming of the Lord to bring in the new creation, of 2 Peter chapter 3, would not be a literal, visible, bodily coming of the Lord to destroy literal, physical creation and to create a literal, physical creation. Just doesn't work. Violates the language. Okay. So jumping ahead now into Isaiah chapter 65. In Isaiah chapter 65, the Lord addresses Israel. Now, some people think that Isaiah chapter 65 was written to address the situation after the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC. I'm not going to deny that there was a typological application. And by the way, scholar after scholar after scholar, and even Paul the Apostle, believed that the events of the Old Covenant were typological of the events to take place at the time of the end. So I'm going to put that out there on the table, as it were, for consideration. However, there are certain things about Isaiah 65 and 66. And by the way, the Jewish rabbis acknowledge this. They believed that this was to take place at the time of the end. At the time when Messiah would come and establish the kingdom. That's what the Jewish rabbis believed. Now, does that prove it's right? No, I'm not saying that. I'm just simply saying that there was an understanding in the ancient Jewish world that Isaiah 65 and 66 was predictive of the time of the end events. And, let me state again, many, I won't say most, but certainly many, a tremendous number of modern day scholars take the same position. Now, the millennialist comes to Isaiah chapter 65 and says, oh, it's talking about the millennium. It's describing life within the millennium. Well, that's troublesome. That's fatal to their own view. And I'll get to that as we proceed. So, with all of that said, okay, what I'm trying to say is that some commentators look at the language that I'm about to read and they say, okay, well, that can't be the first century. Well, allegorically it can, or figuratively it can, because it's talking about, quote, idolatry. Let me read. All right, this is a people that provokes me to anger continually to my face, that sacrifices in gardens and burns incense upon altars of brick, who remain among the graves and lodge in the monuments, which eat swine's flesh. And somebody says, well, Preston, you can't make that apply to the first century because the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC seems to have cured Israel, Judah and Jerusalem specifically, of idolatry. The eating of swine's flesh was something they did, according to Ezekiel chapter 8, before the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC. Well, here's the problem. In the New Testament, Israel was idolatrous, not in the same identical sense as they were prior to 586 BC, but she was idolatrous because she had turned the temple into her idol. Numerous commentators comment on this. So if you want to go typological, pointing toward the end time, I'm okay with that. Point of fact is, the New Testament writers posit the fulfillment of Isaiah 65 for the first century. Well, what do I mean by that? Notice again, Isaiah chapter 65. I am sought of those that ask not for me. I am found of them that sought me not. I said, behold me, to a people that was not called by my name. I have spread out my hands all the day unto a rebellious people which walks in a way that was not good after their own thoughts. Well, here's the deal. Romans chapter 10, 22 and 23, Paul the Apostle quotes these verses verbatim to describe, number one, Israel of his day that was refusing the gospel call, and consequently, as a direct result of that, the Gentiles were called. Since Paul the Apostle applied Isaiah 65, 1 and 2 to the first century, and Israel's rebellion, Israel's rejection of the gospel, and the calling of the Gentiles through his ministry, then guess what that means? That means the entirety of Isaiah 65 must be allowed to apply to the first century based upon the principle of what's known as metalepsis. That means when a New Testament writer would quote from partially part from an Old Testament text, they were bringing that entire prophetic context to the mind of the reader or the mind of the listener. Not only that, when Peter applies Isaiah 65 to what was about to come, then yeah, we have real strong justification for saying Isaiah 65 foretold the last days, i.e. the first century generation. Yes. So with that in mind, we've got more. So I'll see you on the flip side.